Forager, Jessica Yellen, Dana Bash, and the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Democratic Senator Robert Menendez of the great state, the Garden State of New Jersey. Senator, let's make the assumption that this isn't going to work, or at least it stumbles a little bit. It seemed as though the House was definitely not going to support an authorization of force, and the Senate might not either, even though, of course, it passed through your committee, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Can the Obama administration afford to take this back to Congress?
Well, look, I think that many members who I've talked to who are undecided actually view this set of circumstances as an opportunity, and we've been talking about the possibility.
I think they view it as an escape hatch.
Well, I think they look at it as an opportunity in which those who have said we should really exercise the full extent of the diplomacy, although I've argued with them that 2 years of Russian vetoes is a pretty extensive use of diplomacy, but that this opportunity might give them the wherewithal to say, you know what, put this in the resolution, give it an opportunity, and if in fact it doesn't, it would.
They want to vote, really? Because my impression is, well,
do they want to vote? I don't know if anybody wants to vote, but to the extent that there is a vote, I think this would bring votes to the resolution that aren't necessarily there right now.
And on that note, big part of the reason, as you well know, that the opposition was there is because people, even in your own party, feel that the case has not been made by the president. He gave a big speech last night, and your counterpart, Republican counterpart on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, talked to me today and was extremely candid, frustrated, exasperated with the way the president handled that speech and this whole issue in general. Listen to what he said.
The president just seems to be very uncomfortable being commander-in-chief of this nation. He cannot speak to the nation as a commander-in-chief. He cannot speak to the world as a commander-in-chief. He just cannot do it, and I don't know what it is.
Now, this is for people who don't realize he's not a Republican firebrand. On this issue, he worked with you. You wrote the resolution together. He very much supported the president on this issue, and he's saying that he doesn't think he's comfortable as being commander-in-chief. What do you think about that?
Well, look, Bob Corker is an excellent senator. We have passed a whole slew of legislation, including the resolution for the use of force in a bipartisan process. I'm thrilled to be working with him. I think that what I gathered from that interview and his sense of frustration is he wanted the president to make a broader argument beyond that which he made. He wanted him to make, well, I do believe that where the president missed an opportunity in his address last night was to talk about some of the other consequences. For example, what does the Ayatollah in Iran think about our inability to enforce a red line, as we are telling him, do not pass that line as it relates to nuclear weapons? What does the dictator of North Korea think about our resolve as it relates to some of his nuclear process and a big cache of chemical weapons as well? I would have liked to have seen the president extended that and talked about the consequences.
Security argument.
I think he did make a national security argument. I think he could have expanded to the strategic importance that goes beyond Syria into other parts of the world, which are very dangerous for us as well.
Senator, are you at all concerned about who's driving the president's policy? When you look at his first-term national security team, he seemed pretty decisive compared to this. But at that time, he had Secretary Clinton, he had Secretary Panetta, at some point he had Petraeus. Those people are all gone. And does it worry you at all that he doesn't have people? Do you think perhaps he doesn't have people around him who can drive him, who can say no to him, who can give him a little more direction?
Look, the President of the United States is the one person who gets elected by all of us to make the decision. He's the one who holds the nuclear code. He's the one that makes decisions about the use of American forces. He can have a team around him that can make all the arguments in the world. He has to make the final decision. I think these are very capable people.
You know what I'm saying.
But they're very forceful. John Kerry is not a shrinking violet. I don't think Susan Rice is a shrinking violet and has a particularly close relationship with the president, even beyond his previous national security advisor. I don't doubt that they are forceful in their arguments, but he is the president. He makes the final decision.
Can I get back to the negotiations with the Russians? There's been talk of a timetable, no timetable. How long will it take us to know that we're being played?
Yeah. Well, Gloria, I think that these negotiations in Geneva are going to give us a big understanding. The chemical weapons inspectors are supposedly at the UN, supposedly come out with a report
So what's your
next week.
time frame?
I would say that we are going to know pretty clearly within the next 2 weeks whether this is a serious opportunity or not, whether we're going to be at the UN with a resolution somewhere within that time frame. I think that that's going to give us a pretty clear idea whether this is a sincere opportunity or whether this just is a purchase for time and international maneuvering.
Senator, before you go, I want to get your reaction. I asked the White House what they made of the New York Times op-ed and from Vladimir Putin. They did not express any feelings of nausea as you did. They, of course, are in the middle of negotiating.
They must have a stronger stomach.
Stronger stomachs. This is what they said, and this is a senior White House official saying that the op-ed indicates that Putin is now fully invested in Syria's chemical weapon disarmament. I said, well, what about saying that the rebels were behind the chemical weapons? What about the poke in the eye in American exceptionalism? And the official said, that's all irrelevant. Putin put this proposal forward, and he's now invested in it. That's good. That's the best possible reaction. He's fully invested in Syria's CW disarmament. That's potentially better than a military strike, which would deter and degrade but wouldn't get rid of all the chemical weapons. He now owns this. He has fully asserted ownership of it, and he needs to deliver. Now, that's good spin, but do you think that that's what this op-ed says? I am Vladimir Putin, and I own this process?
Look, I don't think that's necessarily what it says, but I don't disagree with the part of the analysis that says, look, Russia has played a card here, and they think it's going to work out to their advantage. This could be a total backfire for Russia. If at the end of the day, the sincerity, the transparency ends up being that this was just a ploy, I think the Russians pay a huge consequence for it. I think the world looks at it in a different way. I think Americans look at it in a different way, and that could backfire.
Don't we pay a price too, though, if it fails?
If
Not just the
if
Russian.
the effort fails?
Yeah.
No, I think what happens is we once again show to the entire world at a time that they're riveted. I don't know they've been riveted for the last 2 years in our efforts at the UN, but the world and the nation is riveted on this right now. And seeing that the Russians lied, if that's what ends up happening, and that in fact it was not sincere, and that in fact we have exhausted all possibilities, I think that strengthens the president's hand. And what we need to be doing in the Congress is making sure that the credible use of military force is on the table, because that's the only way that we're going to get to a diplomatic solution.
Senator Menendez, everybody wants to ask more questions, but I have to end it here. I promised your staff I'd let you get home before you turn into a